have a seat. So I will be doing the presentation in English today. For those that know you, my name is not Jan Jambon. I am filling in for him. My name is Michael Freilich. I'm a member of the Federal Parliament in Belgium, and I follow everything tech and cyber related in the Federal Parliament. And today I would like to talk to you about the state of our tech landscape, specifically in Belgium, but also in Europe. Because what we do notice is that there is a large gap between the United States specifically and Europe. And I would like to share with you a couple of observations, and I'm sorry for the typo here in the observations, but a couple of observations that will help illustrate the difference between the United States and Europe when it comes to high tech and investments. I think the first point is the investments that you have in research and development. And the latest figures that I have here are from 2022, and they show that in the United States, $680 billion were invested from various contributions, not just tech giants, but also through government grants, etc. In Europe, however, the total EU spend on R&D is 350 billion euro. So the gap is there, nearly double the amount spent in the US, and you know that the US has a smaller population than Europe does. So there we're not doing so well, and the graph is illustrating that. The difference becomes even larger when you look at the amount of venture capital funding. In the United States, we're talking about 300 billion euro on VC funding alone in the year 2023. And mainly in the tech sectors that are very hot these days, such as artificial intelligence, biotech, and of course also cybersecurity. When we look at Europe, then we really see there's a problem there. The total investments is 70 billion in 2023, which means that the United States, which is smaller when it comes to the amount of population, still has 4 times more investments done by VCs. And a VC landscape is really important to get companies to invest, and I'll speak to you later more about the venture capital funding and the importance of a healthy venture capital system in attracting foreign investments in companies and to make sure that they can grow. Then the number of unicorns, specifically, of course, in the tech sector. The USA has over 700 unicorns. They're mainly in tech sectors, which are software and AI. When we look at Europe, there's 150 and only 4 in this country. Now, Odoo, which is also the organizer of this event, is one of the 4 Belgian tech unicorns. So the gap there is even larger. Like I said, 5 times more unicorn startups than Europe has. And of course, unicorns are companies that have a value of over $1 billion. And let's look at AI investments, because we all know that artificial intelligence is the future. We also know that we've seen what revolution we've had with ChatGPT, and then all of the other companies that have said they're going to launch their own AI products. There's a lot of AI talk in the entire tech world, and I'm sure here at Odoo as well. So let's actually look at the investments done in the US and in Europe into these sectors. And what do we see is that in Silicon Valley, which obviously dominates these investments, we're talking about startups that have raised just in 2023, $23 billion. Compare that with just $4 billion in Europe in the same year. And unfortunately, these numbers are growing. So we see the investments in the US going up, and the investments in Europe are going down. Now, what is the reason for that very different investment in technology? And of course, once you know the reasons, you can talk about solutions. So let's look at a number of issues that we have. There's 6 differences that I would like to highlight with you today. The first one is regarding talent acquisition and retention. Obviously, you don't have the possibility to build a strong tech company if you can't attract the people. And the people won't stay in the country if they don't find funding. So basically, all of these elements tie into each other. So the US, we know they attract global talent. Also, unfortunately, from Belgium, we have a lot of potential, very good people who end up leaving and going to the US to try and fund their businesses over there. Obviously, the salaries are higher. There are more opportunities for innovation, while in Europe, it's often restricted and limited in your growth potential. A second one is the fragmentation of the market. Of course, the US is one country, which means that you often have one global tech regulations. Yes, you do have individual states that sometimes have their own rules, but they rarely are imposed on tech companies, or at least in a way that tech companies get disturbed by growing. Europe is a fragmented market, and we must work on fixing that from my side. This is something that me as a politician and my colleagues have to discuss on how we can arrange that the market should be more unified, so that if a product is approved in one EU country, it can automatically be applied without having to look at all of the legal regulations of another country. So the fragmentation is something we have to work on. The VC culture is very important, because venture capitalists are the ones that take the risk, that invest the time and the effort in growing the companies. VC funding is not just a check, okay? It's much more than that. It's ensuring that the company that they invest in has the right management on board, has a board of directors with people that have experience in various specific industries, so that they can guide their founders and make sure that they can flourish and grow and prosper. So VC funding is really crucial. And I've shown you the figures about the amount of money spent by VCs in the US and in Europe, and this is something where we must definitely work on. European investors are often more conservative, they prefer steady returns and also prefer traditional industries. But not always, because a lot of institutional investors understand that they must also invest in the future, in tech companies, which sometimes is more risk prone. However, if you do it in a correct way, like the VC funds that are successful, then eventually your gains will far surpass your losses. And another unfortunate thing is a lot of European institutional investors, whether it's Germany or in Italy, they actually invest their money in US venture capital. So you have United States venture funds that come raise money in Europe to then invest that money in the US, which is obviously not the way we want to have it. A fourth element are the various policies and regulations that governments bring on to people. We're talking, for example, as GDPR, the data privacy rules. While obviously it's important that we have the various rules, we have to make sure that we don't oversaturate the companies with various rules. I mean, we all know the story of, as we say, that the US innovates, China emulates, and Europe regulates. I mean, we are, in Europe, we now have an AI Act, while we hardly have AI companies here. Of course, there are foreign companies that come to our shores to try and sell their products, but it would definitely be a shame if that regulation will hold back the European market. One concrete example is the iPhone 16, which I have here. I mean, Apple has announced that very shortly they'll have their AI integrated into the phone, but not in Europe. Okay, so Europeans, first of all, they're paying the same price for their phone, but they're not going to get the software updates that would allow them to fully take use and employ the future of AI to enhance their business, to save time in whatever they're doing. And that is a very big shame. So we must make sure that the various EU legislations don't smother businesses that want to come here. We must be open. We must not just talk about fines and, restricting companies. No, we must have a different view on technology and understanding that technology is something really important for our future and also for our economy. Corporate versus public investments. In the US, you will see that most of the money into tech comes from private corporations. In Europe, it's much more often the government and the public sector that is relied on to start something, or where the government is asked to put skin in the game, make sure that the government, which is public funding, will open up the doors towards getting more investments. But I think we must be honest. Governments, especially in my view and in the view of my party, have to focus on their core business, and that is security and basic services. Let's make sure our healthcare is working. Let's make sure our military, let's make sure our police is funded. All of the other tasks should not be done by governments. The same thing when it comes to investments in tech. Yes, the government should stimulate it. The government should make it more interesting for companies to want to invest, and we're going to get to taxation soon. But governments themselves are not the best placed to start investing or taking over. The countries where governments control everything, look at Russia and China, that's not the model that we want in Europe. So we need to make sure that private companies are definitely the motor of these investments. And then it brings me to the taxation policies, a very important point where we have to keep on hammering that it's important to look at the long-term goal. Many governments, unfortunately, look at the very short term, often also because we're only elected to office for 4 or 5 years. The same thing in Belgium, whereby you want to make sure that at the end of your 5-year stint, you can show this is the amount of money that we raised. And that is where I definitely see the importance for politicians to overcome that step and to try to look at the long term and to also explain to their voters why some investments in lowering taxes won't yield the results today, but you will reap the fruits and those benefits in the future. And I think it's very clear, if you look at the United States market, how many large software and hardware and technical and technology companies we have over there, the added value that they create when it comes to jobs, when it comes to higher productivity gains, and so much more value for the investors who often also are reaping those benefits back in the US, versus the very short-term thinking saying, yes, we can tax these companies, but you won't have many companies to tax because they don't want to stay here. Or you have the personnel that is much too expensive to employ because you're going to pay 50% above your salary, such as the case is in this country, just on hiring and acquiring your people. Let's look at a couple of solutions. So proposals that I would like to expand on here that will hopefully make a difference in the future. So we need to promote a unified digital market. As I said, Europe is very fragmented. You've got different countries with different ideas, different regulations. Of course, yes, we have different languages. That's not something we're going to change easily, and that's something we have to take on board. But there are many things that we can do. So, for example, greater harmonization of the regulation across all the member states, a single cohesive regulatory framework. I think, especially for tech companies, I think the day we can achieve that will already solve a lot of the problems that we see today. A second one would be encourage risk-taking, and that you can do through policy and funding by making it more interesting for VC funds to actually invest their money here. We say, yes, you're taking a risk, but we would like to give you incentives for doing so. And at the end of the day, it's all about the dollar and the cents. And companies, they do shop around, they do try to see where is it more interesting for them, but that's not the only reason why they choose various jurisdictions. There's many reasons for them, but we must be honest and understand that at the end of the day, if companies and VC funds come to a certain country such as Belgium, and at the end of the day they make a nice exit, but they're taxed heavily, whereas in the United States they're not taxed, well, those companies are going to leave. And sometimes they're going to leave within the European Union. I know there was a whole debate a couple of months ago about VC funds from Belgium saying we're all going to move to Luxembourg because of the new plans that the government wanted to push through, which luckily weren't pushed through yet. The same comes, and I think this is just a follow-up of my previous slide, reforming the tax policies. So the solution should be that we need to also look at lowering corporate tax in Europe. I can tell you that for Belgium, we have done so with my party when we were previously in power, and hopefully for those of you who follow the Belgian situation, where my party, which is the NVA, will hopefully be once again in power very soon. The government negotiations are going on. We have to lower the corporate tax. We also have to make tax incentives for R&D. And that's very important because R&D is really where the money is spent on by researchers who put their time and efforts in laboratories. Belgium has one of our success stories when it comes to tech is actually biotech. Pfizer and Janssen Pharmaceutica, which is the vaccine from Johnson, have large centers in this country. For those who have followed it, Pfizer just announced yesterday that 220 jobs in Belgium would be scrapped. Now, obviously, they're not going to point directly where the issue is, but we know what the issue is. R&D, personnel are taxed heavily, and even though we have certain incentives, it turns out that it's very difficult for tech companies here to actually receive the cash back that they've been promised, because they have to report and over-reporting on proving that their personnel really is busy with R&D and not with sales and with marketing. So we need to look at investors and take them on their word when they say these type of people are working in research and development. Obviously, you have to have the possibility to check that, but at the moment, the regulation and the checking of those workers is so burdensome for companies that they say, forget it, I'm out of here. We have to boost private sector R&D investments, very important. We saw how many billions of dollars private companies in the United States are investing in tech. And obviously, this is a snowball effect. The larger your tech sector is, the more they can invest in R&D. We've got a relatively small tech sector and high-tech sector compared to the United States, so there's obviously going to be less dollars flowing there. I know that Microsoft announced a large investment in AI in a French company, but then we have, again, the American large corporations that are investing in Europe. Wouldn't it be nice if European companies were able to grow? I think if you look at the really large tech companies that we all know, such as Apple, such as Amazon, such as Google, Netflix, the ones that everyone uses throughout the world, there's only one European name there, and that is Spotify, which I think is Sweden. But all the other companies are from the United States. We need to also make sure that we develop and retain talent. Too many times we have people that are very good at what they do, that are experts in their field, but that say the opportunities in Europe are not the same as in the United States. First of all, yes, we're talking about higher salaries. People who work hard, people who dedicate their entire lives, founders who do nothing else but work on their company, want to make sure that at least they will be rewarded at the end of the day. They want to make sure they have a comfortable salary. And that is one of the points that I've pointed to before. But of course, if you want to have strong R&D, you must make sure that the pool of potential people that will work in that field, or who will come up with the creative and the technical work, that you have that pool. So we have to invest funding into STEM education. We're talking about more science, technology. So from a young age, this must be promoted. And Europe doesn't have a lot of natural resources anymore. There's no big coal industry. We see that the car manufacturers are leaving. Either it's to Eastern Europe, but very often also to other countries, whether it be China, or now with China a bit more complicated, then it's other countries in Asia, or to Mexico. Belgium is a very clear example of that. We used to have amazing amounts of manufacturing of cars in this country. From Volvo to Volkswagen to Audi. Audi just announced last week they're closing their plant here. So they're all leaving. So not only have we lost our industry when it comes to energy that we take from the ground here. Obviously, Norway is a different story, but not all countries have coal or gas and have that luck. But also the industries where we actually produce items, more and more, these will be shifted to outside of the European shores. So what's our future? It's the services industry, it's tourism, but of course, technology is a very, very important one. And therefore, we need to make sure that our future generations are prepared to take technology into their own hands. I think a very important one is culture. We need to foster an entrepreneurial culture and debate. Failing, for me, failing is part of growing up. For those that have children, you all know your child, when he starts to walk, they fall. No one will walk without falling. No one will run without falling. It's normal. And often in business, it's the same thing. Failure is not bad, not necessarily bad. How many people have not gone bankrupt in the United States with their company and actually taken lessons from that to make sure that they don't repeat those lessons? And I've spoken to VCs and they tell me when a founder comes to me and he's got 3 bankruptcies from his companies under his belt, that's interesting for me because then I know that the guy or the person has experience and will not make these same errors again. Well, in Europe, and especially in my country here in Belgium, failure is seen as something bad. Failure in business. People are ostracized. People are looked at as a failure. And that culture, that change in culture is something that needs to be permeated through all the levels. It's not something that we in government can necessarily do. It is also something that we will need as a society to take on board, as we need as a society to tell our people and show them that failure is not necessarily bad. We need to give them the tools that if and when they fail, that they can get up once more and have the hope and the opportunity to do it again. So this is a very important message that I keep on repeating, both to politicians, also to social media stars, people who have TikTok accounts or that reach wide audiences, teachers in school. We must, at all levels, say to people in Europe, go ahead, build your company, invest in it, and if you fail, it's okay. Nothing will happen bad if you fail. The person and the VC that invested in you knows the risk he's taking when he's investing in you. And they're expecting that a lot of the companies will indeed fail. And that is how a VC world works. But you need to tell people that from the beginning. A lot of entrepreneurs in Europe are scared to even get into the game because they don't want to fail. I know a couple of companies in cybersecurity that are doing very well in Belgium. And I've told them, you've got a very good product, why don't you move to other European countries? And often I hear, well, Michael, we're happy with what we have and we're growing steadily. And why take more risk? Because opening a company abroad is an investment, it might not work. So people are very scared of taking a risk, but if you don't take risks, you'll never succeed and you can never grow at an exponential rate. And that is what we need. All of these tech companies are taking massive amounts of risk, they're taking a lot of debt on board, but someone is funding that at the end of the day. And by taking the risk, you can also increase the reward. Not just the reward for yourself, but for the entire economy. You'll hire more people, you'll make sure your products are seen and used by more people. So I see this as a win-win. Then we need to strengthen especially the AI and the emerging technology ecosystems. What I mean with this is we have to create specialized funds, and there I think the government can be the initial seed to bring private investors together and to say, listen guys, we believe that this is where the future is going. We will start with the first seed funding. Why don't you add on top of that? And we need to also work closer together between various countries. What we see now is that every single country is its own island when it comes to tech investments. You have the Italian funds, you have the German funds, you have the French funds, and often they're also very chauvinistic. They say, well, we'll only invest in French companies. And we're not going to look at an Irish company or German only because it's German taxpayers' money. We need to leave that idea. That's an old idea. Europe is one. We have a unified and a single market. We need to make sure that between Europe we can collaborate and work together. The regulatory flexibility, I think, is an obvious one. Like I've explained previously, we need to make sure that companies don't see Europe as a place that they don't want to be in. that they don't say, oh, this is Europe, it's going to be complex, they're going to ask me 100 questions, I'm going to have to fill in documents. No, we need to make it easy for companies to be able to operate here. Let's go to Belgium, because this is the country where we're in. What can we do? Because often, and I think the same stories, it's not just from Belgium, I don't know where everyone is from, but every single country can ask themselves, what can they do on an individual level to enhance the investments and the growth in tech? Because even though we're part of a global European strategy, individual member states still have the opportunity to be very effective. And I'll give you a couple of examples from various countries. To start with Ireland. And the idea in Ireland was, how can we make sure that all of these tech companies come to our country? Well, let's reduce the corporate tax rate. And that's what they did. And suddenly you saw a massive influx over the last 10, 15 years of international high-tech companies saying, this is an interesting tax rate, 12.5%. Why do we have to pay double or more in other European countries? And as of 2020, over 1,000 multinational tech companies operate in Ireland. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that every country has to try and beat each other out, but at the end of the day, if you are an individual member state and there's no harmonized tax, this is something that you should be looking at. Because the investments, because the benefits for a country like Ireland are massive. Look at the tech sector. It accounts for 13 or 14% of the GDP. In Belgium, we're at 5.9%, not even 6%. So I think that that is something we can look at. And here's the graph that you can see the difference. Tech sector contribution to the GDP, Ireland versus Belgium. So look at that amazing graph. We started in the 2000s, we were almost the same. It was close to 3 or 2.5%. And today the gap has widened significantly, and I'm scared that it will only continue in the future as well. Another example I would like to give is Germany, where they fostered innovation, specifically by encouraging partnership between universities, research institutions, and private companies. And a nice example is the Fraunhofer Society, and they actually have 72 different research institutes and a massive annual budget of 2.9 billion euros. And that actually helped Germany to have a leading position when it comes in fields like engineering and industrial automation. A lot of the machines and robotics that are used all over the world to make products come from Germany. Whether they make them in Taiwan or in China or in the United States, the robots are very often, and the plants are very often German, because the German government decided to focus all of their assistance towards a number of, to one institution that will then invest in very many different universities and different sectors. We have something similar in Belgium with IMEC, but then it's specifically for the chip sector and not for other sectors. We have Vito, but we can definitely learn something from that. And if you look at the amount of R&D as a number of the GDP, then you see that in Europe, Germany invests 120 billion euros a year, which is 3.13%. They want to go to 3.5% of their R&D. And if you look at Belgium, it's just 2.58. And in reality, we would need 5%. Okay, so we are very far away from that figure, and that's where we really have to go to in the future. Another example is Singapore, and now I'm going outside of the European Union. What Singapore has done is they came up a couple of years ago with the idea of prioritizing specifically digital skills through education and reskilling program. They wanted to make sure that they are an AI country. And how do you do that? You train your people. You train, first of all, in schools, but also your existing workforce population. And what happened was, we can see that through their Skills Future initiative, they provided, and these figures are a couple of years old, I think now it's close to 750,000 training opportunities for workers to develop their skills. And they've ranked, as you can see, the second in the world on AI readiness. And also the benefits, they've massively received investments. We're talking in 2020, 11 billion euros or dollars was invested just in the tech sector in 1 year, and that was because the government took the initiative to make sure that the population is ready for it. So promoting AI and digital skill development. Another example is Israel. And when we look at Silicon Valley in the United States, in Israel they call it Silicon Wadi, they've created many tech incubators and they have innovation hubs. So many startups there. Israel's often called a startup nation, and when it comes to population, it's a small country. They have 10 million people. In Belgium we have 11 million people, and they live in a very difficult neighborhood. So that problem of living in a difficult neighborhood is something we don't have in Europe, so we should definitely try to take it. The amount of startups they have there, on average, is 1,400 startups launched every single year. That is an amazing amount for such a small country. And that comes because of a number of reasons. First of all, you have the Israeli Innovation Authority that provides co-funding. You have education. From a young age, people are taught to follow the degrees in technology and in engineering. You have the fact that when it comes to startups that fail, people say no problem. There's also that culture. So I think that Israel can be another example of what we can look at. And I have the last part of the slide is Israel today has over 90 unicorns. So startups that are valued over $1 billion. Examples are Wix, Mobileye, etc. And the high-tech sector accounts for 43% of Israel's exports and 15% of GDP. That is phenomenal, and so much more than a country like Belgium. 90 unicorns for a country that has a smaller population than Belgium, and I think we have 3 or 4 tech unicorns. So that shows you that size does not matter when it comes to tech. Okay, it's definitely not an issue of, well, we're a small country, we can't do it alone, we're not part of a bigger market. That is not the excuse that you can use here. I'm going to go to Canada now. And one of the important things that we need to understand is if you want to attract people, also when you're a small country, is looking outside of your borders. You have sometimes very good engineers that they live in Asia or in other countries or South America. You need to make sure that these people can come here and can start working fast. Unfortunately, in many European countries, that is an absolute disaster. People are busy with weeks and months going to the communes and the cities and trying to get their work permits and their visas that they can stay. And the moment that that is arranged, because they can say, well, I have a job at a company, their spouse might not be able to stay because, we have strict rules on immigration. You can't come here if you don't have a job. Well, if you're a single mother or a single father, then it's okay, or a single person. But the moment you're in a relationship and one of the partners says, well, we've got 4 kids, I'm going to stay home, then we've often seen that partner has a very hard time to receive a visa. And one of the sad cases was a researcher at one of the large Brussels institutions who said, well, I'm leaving the country. I've tried for 2 years, and this is an absolute nightmare. I'm working, my husband's the stay-at-home dad with the kids, and he does just not receive the documents he needs. We're leaving. So this is an example of how we're shooting ourselves in the foot by finally attracting the right people, and then they're leaving because we're not ready for them. So what Canada has done, and I think this is a nice example that we can follow, they have a global talent stream. The visa allows companies to fast-track hiring for highly skilled workers, and in as little as 2 weeks, they can arrange that the visa application is done. If you look at the benefits, Toronto was ranked 4th globally for tech talent growth, and they added an amazing 81,000 tech jobs just in 5 years. And if you look at the foreign workers, how much they helped the GDP grow, then you see that is also phenomenal. Finally, I want to bring back to Europe. Let's look at Estonia, and they have, even though they're a small country, also try to think out of the box, because this is what we need. At the end of the day, you have competition between countries to attract talent and to make sure that companies want to invest and want to stay in your country. So you can say, well, I'm going to have lower taxes, I'm going to make sure that the visas are easier, I'm going to make sure that the government co-invests, that the regulatory landscape is fine. But sometimes you also need to think out of the box, where you think, what can I bring to the table that other countries don't have? And so Estonia did that exercise and came up with the idea of, why not have, and this is a digital first, an initiative like an e-residency, which means it's a virtual residency. You don't actually have to live or come to the country in order to set up your business. And that is proven to be very successful. If you look at the impact, the e-residency program, which was introduced 10 years ago, and allows entrepreneurs to establish a business remotely. By 2021, they had over 85,000 e-residents from over 170 countries registered, and they created 17,000 companies. 17,000 companies. And the impact is also been quite large on a country like Estonia, because their digital first strategy also, again, has boosted the tech sector, with the ICT industry accounting for 7% of the country's GDP. I showed you the figures for Germany, was something in the 3% range. I showed you the figures for Belgium. I think it was 2.58%. Estonia, much smaller, 7%. Why? Because they said, we have an issue. Let's try to think out of the box. How can we ensure that we attract foreigners and foreign investments to our shores? The conclusion for me is actually very simple. We have possibilities, and we have many possibilities, but we require work to achieve it. You can't just sit back and hope for someone else to fix your problems. Every single individual European member state must sit down, prepare an overarching program where they can benchmark themselves compared to other countries and understand that for them, this is going to be an important future. And that is what I try to explain to my colleagues, because I have a little bit of a tech background, try to explain to my colleagues that technology is not something to be looked at as negative. Well, the large companies, they take all of our data and they're going to destroy the individuality. And in Europe, we like to have still the old mom and pop store. So the idea that technology is bad is something that we and the tech sector and all of you here must help counter, and we must convince the leaders of the countries, and I'm doing that from within the government, that it shouldn't just be words. Because that is a problem that you often find in Europe, that there's beautiful words on we need to invest in tech, but at the end of the day, are you changing your tax system? Are you making it less complicated when it comes to regulation? Or are you just doing the same thing? And I don't believe that spending the public's money in, Mario Draghi now proposed a plan, 800 billion euros, let's invest it in tech and in AI. Well, it's 800 billion euros that comes from the European taxpayer. Like I said, governments should be there to facilitate, to make sure that investors want to invest in your country. They don't have to be the ones investing themselves. Yes, they need to kickstart it and give it a push, but they shouldn't be the one that do everything. So I think that when it comes to Europe, when it comes to tech, much more needs to happen, and all of you here, all of the tech entrepreneurs need to repeat that message to all the governments at all levels, that it's not just words. There is tremendous gains to be gained by technology, and by technology companies, and by high-tech companies, and by startups, and by scale-ups. That is going to be the future. Like I said, we don't have natural resources, or very few in Europe. The industrial businesses are also leaving. More and more clothing, food, cars, manufacturing is also leaving. So what is going to be our future? I think our future is tech. Our future is technology. Of course, you have the services industry as well, but a very large amount of growth can be achieved by technology. So if we want to safeguard the long-term future, and I'm not talking one election cycle, I'm not talking 4 years or 5 years. If we want to safeguard the long-term future of our children and of European companies, then we must make sure that all of the points I mentioned before are actually implemented at the European level. But Europe is large, and Europe is bureaucracy, and Europe is lobbying, and if you have 10 people pulling at the European Commission from one side, then what will happen? Someone will pull into here, and then he will be pulled back to the other side. At the end of the day, the guy won't move and won't budge. We need to make sure that European regulators understand what the problem is. I think the figures speak for themselves. The tremendous gap in investments that we have between the US and Europe that I started with speaks for themselves. The loss in future productivity also is very clear, and now we must take the solutions. Yes, individual member states can do something, and I've given you 5 or 6 examples, and I'm also calling upon my own colleagues in Parliament and in government to start implementing some of these immediately. But at the end of the day, we are a unified bloc in the European Union, and we need to all together understand and put these measures up. So this is my presentation. I see I have a couple of more minutes, so if there's questions from the audience, I will be able to take them, but I have to look at the technical staff if they have that possibility of people to ask questions. Yes, you do. Do you have a microphone to go around? Or yes. Okay. They have to come here. Yeah.
Test. Okay, c'est bon. Okay. So if someone have just a question, raise your hand and come if you want, or I can come with the microphone. So I don't know.
Don't be shy. If there's no immediate questions, then and you want to speak to me, you have my email address on the presentation, and you can always reach out to me. I don't see any hands, so I would like to thank you for your time and spread the message. Thank you very much.